Good afternoon again. Okay, and thank you. Thank you for joining the Coordinating Early Childhood Funding Streams webinar. My name is Stephanie Garys, and I'm an Early Childhood Technical Assistance Specialist with the National TA Center for the Preschool Development Grants Birth to 5. We're really excited about the presentation today, and we would love it if you introduced yourself in the chat so we know who is joining us. And just to let you know, all participants have been muted to reduce background noise, and this webinar is being recorded for those who can't join us today and for your future reference. Okay. So before we get started, I'd like to go over the agenda. So we will start with the objectives, and then I will turn it over to Jennifer Tschantz with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, ASPE for short, and she will be joined by her project team from Mathematica. They will provide an overview of their recent project and present the Braiding funding for ECE tool. While we'll have a short time allotted for questions after the tool is presented, please feel free to enter questions in the chat box along the way, and we will answer them as we can. So after that, we will hear from Lori Connors-Tadros, who is part of the PDG B5 leadership team, and she will be sharing resources developed by our center. And then we will have Richard Gonzalez, the Director of the Division of Interagency and Special Initiatives at the Administration of Children and Families, Office of Child Care, and he will discuss COVID-19 relief funds. Next slide. So our objectives today, they're pretty straightforward. We want to provide materials and tools for states and territories to use in coordinating multiple funding streams, and we will share how to access and use the new tool and other materials. We would also like to share the information on the flexibility of the COVID-19 relief funds. So I would like to introduce Jennifer before I turn it over to her. She is the early childhood team lead at ASPE, and she leads a team focused on supporting the implementation of evidence-based policies and practices that improve programs and outcomes for young children birth to age 5 and their families. She and her colleagues collaborate across offices in the department and with other federal agencies to better align efforts across various federal early childhood programs and initiatives with the goal of ensuring all young children and their families have access to high quality, comprehensive programs and services. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks to the PDG Birth to 5 TA team for making this happen. There's been, they work so hard, and there's so much that goes into these webinars. And so we feel really appreciative that you've given us this platform to share our new tool. So I'm going to be really brief because I know people want to see what this new tool is. But long story short, about a year ago, the office I'm in, ASPE, had some funding available actually from the Council for Economic Mobility that we coordinate. And it was just a little bit of money, and we knew we wanted to do something in the early childhood space. And one of the issues that keeps coming up again and again, and I know that you all out in the field face this regularly, is how do we mix funding from different federal sources to do different things in early care and education, to increase slots, to increase access to quality, to be able to provide those comprehensive services for families and young children that are already in our programs. How does that all work, and what does that look like? So this was an issue, since we keep hearing it, that we wanted to try and tackle. I'm here to tell you that unfortunately there are no easy answers to this issue. But one of the things is that that we found is that there were a lot of resources that already existed in this space. So as we began to dig into this, we were really pleasantly surprised with how much already existed. And so one thing we wanted to be really clear that we didn't do was reinvent the wheel. And thankfully, we were able to connect with our partners at Mathematica, Pia Caronongan and Kathryn Gonzalez, to really help us dig in to figure out what the next step would be and what might a tool look like that really could help move the field a little bit further. Katie and Pia are going to share more about how they developed the tool and the steps they took, and to figure out what was already in existence so that we weren't recreating the wheel, and to help us figure out what the next steps are. And one of the things I will say is that because we knew there was a lot that already existed, where we kind of landed was, I've kind of referred to it as a mega tool. It's really much more of an organizing framework or an organizing structure or process that it leads users through. And it really connects them to both the different aspects of blending and braiding different funds, as well as existing resources that could be helpful depending on how they're approaching this issue. And so they're going to say a little bit more about that. But before I turn it over, one last kind of plea to you all is we really want to hear from you. So as they're walking through the tool, please put your questions in the chat. We've left plenty of time for direct questions, but if something pops up, put it in the chat. And also comment on the tool itself, this new tool, but think about what else would be helpful to you in your state or to local entities. If we happen to come across some new money down the road, you know, we really like to think of this as one step in this area, but we know that there's so much more because it's so complex that could be done. So we really welcome your ideas on what else would be helpful to you in the field. And so I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pia, who's going to talk a little bit more about the steps they went through to develop the tool.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us and letting us join you. It's always wonderful to see everyone coming from far and wide. Let's see. So before I start off talking a little bit more about what we did, we wanted to start with a little bit of a poll. Just to get a sense of, you know, where everyone is coming from in terms of the topic we're talking about today. So Carla is going to share some poll questions. The first of which is so that we can find out how much experience you have with braiding, blending, or layering funding streams for early childhood.
I'm receiving an error message for the poll.
Oh, that's too bad.
One of the co-hosts able to launch the poll?
Let me try that. There we go. So if you could take a minute to. Great, I'm seeing a few responses starting to roll in. And we'll just take a minute to make sure we get a good proportion of the folks in the room so we get a good sense of everyone's experience. Maybe when we were almost at 50%, keep it coming, keep it coming. We can probably, should I end it, Carla, or are you able to see it now?
I can't see the results, but if you are close to the percentage that you want to see, you can close and share.
Okay, let's see. Share, yep. All right. So can everybody see the poll results? Yes. So it looks like in terms of experience braiding, blending, or layering, for the most part, 53% of the people who responded have about a little bit of experience, and then about a third have no experience, and there's about 14% who have a lot of experience. So that's a nice mix. And then in terms of the purpose for which your state or organization has pursued braiding, blending, or layering of funding streams, again, we see a good mix. Many have pursued it for increasing access, followed by 30% who have pursued it for increasing access to comprehensive services. And then about 22% have pursued it to improve quality of early care and education. And there's 15% who have said that you've pursued braiding or blending or layering for other purposes. We'd love to hear what those purposes are too. Feel free to share those in the chat. But for now, I will keep moving forward. If you can go to the next slide, Carla. So before fully jumping in, I did want to clarify some definitions. You'll see in the poll, I kept saying braiding, blending, layering, which is a mouthful. And just to clarify the different ways that multiple funding streams can be used. So braiding is used to refer to when multiple funding streams are used to support total costs, but are tracked separately. So just imagine braided strings where you can still see those strands and make them out. Blending is when multiple funding streams are mixed together to support total costs, but you can't really distinguish without needing to distinguish where each particular stream is going. And then finally, layering refers to when there's a foundational funding source that's then supplemented by additional layers to add some services. So just for simplicity and not to wear out the terms here, moving forward, we're going to be referring to these collectively as braiding, but I just did want to acknowledge that there is technically a distinction between these three ways. So then if we can go to the next slide, Carla, thank you. So as Jennifer alluded to, before we dove into actually developing this tool, we started off by taking on two foundational tasks. So the first was we wanted to figure out what is already out there. You know, as Jennifer said, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We know there's been a lot of good work on this already. And when we did a systematic search, we did find that was the case, that we found 130 potentially relevant resources on this topic. And what we did was we focused. Yes. Sorry, did someone have a question? Maybe just someone not on mute. We focused on 52 of these 130 resources just to kind of take a closer look at them. And we focused on 52 that covered a range of topics and were sort of more recently published, so 2010 or later. And then importantly, we also spoke with multiple stakeholders with
so even though you're marking 20 hours, you may have given us
with
30.
Varying experiences with braiding about what has helped them and what resources might be useful. So those stakeholders included state and local administrators, as well as experts in ECE policy and finance, and then also some federal partners. So then the key takeaways from these two foundational tasks: one, as we've said, there are already many rich existing resources. So we wanted to add some value. We didn't want to just be duplicating efforts. The second is that we learned, particularly from our conversations with stakeholders, that it can be challenging to figure out where to start or how to go about the process. And so it's helpful to try and break down that process a little bit so it's not this one big thing, but that you can break it up into different pieces. And the third key takeaway for us is that states and local communities vary in terms of context, experience, and needs. So there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to the braiding process, and we recognize that in this tool. So we try, it's not prescriptive in the sense of you must do this, that, and the other, but we are really hoping that by designing the tool in this way, that there is something for everyone, because we talk about different aspects. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Katie, who is going to walk us through the tool, which is what we're all here for.
Great, thank you so much, Pia. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the tool, which hopefully you should be seeing now, the Braiding Funding for ECE tool. And so I first want to say thank you again to everyone for attending the webinar today. I'm excited to use the next 20 minutes or so to walk through the tool that we have developed to support braiding for early care and education. So as Jennifer and Pia have just said, our goal with developing this tool was really to develop a meta tool to help guide users at the state and the local level to relevant resources that they can use throughout the braiding process. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll walk through the tool that we've developed in order to support braiding for early care and education. So as you have just heard, there are many rich existing resources that can support the braiding process, but it can often be challenging to figure out where to start or how to go about the process of braiding. With this tool, we've endeavored to break down the braiding process a little bit further and to map existing resources to specific aspects of the braiding process to help those interested in braiding identify relevant resources. The tool that I'll be showing today is a web-based version of the tool, but we've also developed a companion document. The web-based tool and the companion document cover the same content and include the same lists of resources. The key difference is that the web-based tool that I'll show today includes a series of guiding questions to point users to the most relevant resources. However, during the walkthrough, I'll also highlight how users can access the companion document. So here, what you're seeing here is the landing page that users see when they first access the web-based tool. This graphic, shown in the middle, illustrates the 8 aspects of the braiding process that are covered by this tool. This includes identifying funding streams, identifying eligible populations and comparing funding stream requirements, building integrated data systems, aligning the requirements of funding streams, developing shared goals and a plan for collaboration, building state or local programs that use multiple funding streams, developing governance structures to support collaboration, as well as supporting braiding at the provider level. However, I do want to emphasize that in this tool, we acknowledge that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to braiding, and that the braiding process for a particular state or locality may not follow the exact order that is in which these different aspects of the braiding process are presented in this tool. For example, some states and local communities may find it useful to develop shared goals and a plan for collaboration before identifying funding streams. Other communities or states may choose to begin the process of collaboration and planning after they have identified potentially relevant funding streams. Other states and local communities may seek to first learn more about eligibility and reporting requirements for different funding streams to assess the feasibility of braiding before engaging in collaborative planning. We've developed this tool so that states and localities can find resources that inform the approach that makes the most sense for their context. So now I will click Start to enter into the tool. And on this first introduction page, we do provide some key definitions. The first include definitions of braiding, blending, and layering, which Pia just described. As you all know, there are multiple ways that states and local communities may be able to leverage multiple funding streams. And in this first section of the tool, we provide some definitions of how we use these terms and also clarify that for simplicity, throughout the rest of the tool, we will use the process of braiding to refer to all 3 of these approaches. We also provide a brief overview of the braiding process as defined by this tool, emphasizing again that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to braiding, and that although we present different aspects of the braiding process in a particular order in this tool, that is not necessarily the order that states or local communities may choose to follow. Then users can click Continue to move into the second introduction page of the tool. This second page provides additional information about the specific aspects of the braiding process that are included in this tool. As I mentioned, there is a companion document that includes the same content as the web-based tool, including the same lists of relevant resources. This introduction page includes a link to where users can access a PDF version of the tool. In terms of navigating through the tool, there are 2 options. For users who are new to the braiding process or who have not yet used the tool, we include a series of guiding questions that can help users identify the resources that are relevant to them. For users who are either familiar with the braiding process, know the types of resources they are looking for, or who have previously used the tool, we also include direct links to each group of resources. For example, for a user who already knows that they want to find additional information about this first aspect of the braiding process, that is identifying funding streams, they can click this first link here labeled Identify Funding Streams. That will take them directly to a list of resources that provides information about existing resources that contain information about funding streams that can be used to expand ECE access, expand access to comprehensive services, and to improve early care and education quality. I'll provide more information about what exactly is included in these lists of resources when I walk through the main content of the tool. For the rest of this preview, I'll walk through the guiding questions that a first-time user of the tool might use. Users can click Take me to the guiding questions to begin entering the tool. As I mentioned, the way that the tool is organized, users will see a series of guiding questions that will take them to lists of relevant resources that are aligned with different aspects of the braiding process. Here on the screen is the first guiding question. In this question, the user is asked whether they would like to learn more about funding sources that are available to their state or locality. If a user would like to learn more about this particular topic, they can select yes and click continue. If a user did not wish to learn more about the resources contained in this section, they could instead click no, and they would be moved on to the next guiding question. In this case, I'll select yes and click continue to indicate that I would like to learn more about identifying funding streams. In this section, users would then see a second guiding question, which asks about goals in braiding funds. By answering this question, the tool will provide a list of resources that are aligned with the state or locality's particular goal with regards to braiding funds. Users can select one, two, or all three of these goals. For illustrative purposes, I'll select the first two goals, which are increasing access to ECE and increasing access to comprehensive child and family services. Based on the responses to those two prior questions, users are then taken to a page with lists of resources. What the user will see depends on their responses to those prior guiding questions. For example, because we selected expanding access to ECE and expanding access to comprehensive child and family services, we see two drop-down tables that relate to each of these goals. This first table includes a list of resources on funding streams that can be used to expand early care and education access. In this table, we include the name of each resource as well as a link to where it can be found online. All of the resources that are included in this tool are publicly available online. We also include the relevant section or pages of the particular resource, as well as a description of the resource and how it is relevant to a particular aspect of the braiding process. One thing that we did learn from our review of existing resources, as well as our discussion of stakeholders, is that while there are a lot of resources out there, it can be difficult to find them. And if you do have them, it can sometimes be difficult to know exactly where to look in the resource for information or guidance pertaining to a particular aspect of the braiding process. Our aim with presenting information about resources in this way is that it will not only allow users to identify relevant resources, but also allow them to navigate directly to the portion of the resources that are relevant to the particular aspect of the braiding process. Returning to these initial tables of resources, in addition to seeing resources on funding streams that are aligned or can be aligned with the user specified goals, we also see some lists of other relevant resources as well. For example, in this drop-down box, Developing Fiscal Maps, we present a table of resources that can help users develop fiscal maps, as well as additional resources and worksheets that states and local communities can use to compare and contrast funding streams. We also provide in this section some examples and case studies of fiscal map development. Once users have reviewed all of the relevant resources in this section, they can close the boxes and click Continue to move on to the next section of the tool. After clicking Continue, users are taken to the next guiding question. This next section of the tool is focused on identifying eligible populations and comparing funding stream requirements. In this section of the tool, users can find resources that provide information about differences in eligibility and reporting requirements between funding streams. As with the prior section, users can select yes to indicate that they would like to learn more about differences in eligibility and reporting requirements between funding streams. As before, they will be taken to a page with drop-down boxes of relevant resources. At the beginning of this section, we also include some introductory text to provide some context about the resources that are presented, as well as some potential challenges that states or localities may encounter with this particular aspect of the braiding process, in order to provide some additional guidance and support about how users might use these different relevant resources. As in the first section of the tool, we provide lists of relevant resources. For example, in this first drop-down box, we present information on resources that provide information about comparing the funding stream requirements for different early childhood funding streams. As before, the table shows the name of the relevant resource and a link to where it is online, the section or page numbers, as well as a description of information that is included in the resource. In this section, for some resources, users may be interested in information that relates to a particular funding source. So in this section, we also include information about the particular funding sources that are covered by each topic. As before, once users have reviewed the resources in this section, they can click Continue to move on to the next section of the tool. The third section of the tool focuses on building integrated data systems to facilitate the sharing of information to determine eligibility and fulfill reporting requirements. As before, the guiding question for this section asks users if they would like to learn more about this topic. Users can select yes and click Continue. And as before, users will again see a page of resources, a page of drop-down boxes that include lists of relevant resources, as well as supporting text that provides additional information about how users may find these resources to be helpful. In this section, we include resources that provide information about how to support the development of integrated and connected data systems. And we also provide some illustrative examples of state and local efforts to build integrated data systems that are featured in these resources. Users can review these examples as well as refer to the particular resource for additional information. Moving on to the next section of the tool. The fourth section of the tool focuses on aligning the requirements of funding streams. The resources described in this section provide information about how states and localities can align eligibility and other requirements of funding streams where possible to promote the continuity of care for children and families, reduce burden for program administrators, and to support braiding. As before, users who would like to learn more about how to align funding stream requirements can select yes and click Continue. As before, users will see a list of relevant resources. The resources covered in this topic around aligning funding stream requirements are organized based on the particular funding streams that are covered by the relevant resource. These include resources to help states align eligibility and reporting requirements for Head Start, Early Head Start and CCDF, CCDF and TANF, state PK and federal funding streams, as well as aligning Medicaid eligibility with other programs. As before, we also highlight some specific examples of how states have aligned eligibility requirements. Moving on to the next section of the tool. In the fifth section of the tool, we focus on resources that can help states and localities develop shared goals and plans for collaboration in order to facilitate ongoing and sustainable coordination. The resources included in this section include resources to help states and localities articulate shared goals and institute a collaborative planning process that may involve multiple funding streams, agencies, or departments. The resources in this, when we click continue, we'll see that this section includes two groups of resources. The first includes resources to support collaborative planning between agencies and departments, as well as resources to support the development, resources that include information on developing and utilizing venues for interagency or interdepartmental collaboration. In the sixth section of the tool, we describe resources that provide lessons learned and recommended best practices for building programs, initiatives, and systems at the state level that leverage multiple funding streams. As before, users who would like to learn more about building state or local programs, initiatives, or systems that leverage multiple funding streams can select yes and click continue. In this case, they will again be taken to a follow-up question that asks about the user's goals in coordinating funding streams at the state level. As before, they can select one, two, or all three of these goals. To illustrate, again, I'll focus on the first two goals, increasing access to ECE and increasing access to comprehensive child and family services. We'll then be taken to a page of resources that describe first some general lessons from programs, initiatives, and systems that use multiple funding streams. We also see that there are lists of resources that describe lessons from programs, initiatives, and systems that use multiple funding streams to expand access to early care and education, which was the first of our selected goals. We also see a list of resources describing lessons from state and local efforts that use multiple funding streams to expand access to comprehensive child and family services, which was the second of our selected goal. As before, users can click continue to move on to the next section of the tool. In the second to last section of the tool, we focus on resources to support the development of governance structures to support collaboration in order to support ongoing collaboration between agencies and other key players in state or local ECE systems. As before, users can select yes and continue to learn more about the resources in this section. In this section, we present a table similar to the prior sections that include information that include resources that users can refer to find recommendations and examples of governance structures that can support the implementation of coordinated early care and education systems. Finally, we turn to the last section of the tool. This tool is broadly focused on braiding and supporting coordination at the state or locality level. However, braiding may also happen at the provider level. In this section, we provide information about resources that can help states and local communities support the efforts of early care and education providers to utilize multiple funding streams to expand access to services and support children and families. As before, users who would like to learn more about supporting braiding at the provider level can click into this section. In this section, we first highlight some of the common challenges to braiding at the individual provider level. This includes significant amounts of staff time and resources required to manage requirements of multiple funding streams, as well as the need to use complex cost allocation methods to track how different funding streams are used, among others. In this section, we first provide information from a recent report from the Illinois Early Learning Council that recommends specific types of supports that states can provide to facilitate braiding at the program level. We also describe resources that include information about the different approaches that individual providers can use to braid multiple funding streams. Finally, we describe resources that provide in-depth guidance on braiding for program administrators. As we note, this tool is generally focused on braiding and supporting coordination at the state or locality level. However, users at the state or locality level may still find it useful to refer to these resources that are aimed at providers as they provide technical assistance, training, and other supports to providers in their state or locality to help in their use of multiple funding streams. Finally, at the end of the tool, users are given an opportunity to review their answers to each of the guiding questions. Here, users will see each of the guiding questions aligned in each section, as well as their responses. Users can print this page as a reference if they would like to return to the tool at a later point. And so that concludes the preview of the tool. So now I believe we have a few minutes to answer any questions that anyone has about the tool. I will leave the tool up and continue sharing my screen in case it would be useful to refer to a certain section of the tool. And so I believe during the presentation, there may have been some questions that were entered in the chat. Not sure if there were, Pia and Jennifer, if there are any in particular that we wanted to answer.
There was just one question, Katie, that Jennifer and I actually both answered at the same time on the chat. The question was just whether the tool includes counties or applies to counties. And we both did say that yes, we think there are resources included that can be useful for states as well as local communities, and that certainly does include counties. And then I'll just note that we did add a link to the tool. Some folks already figured out from seeing your screen that what the URL is, but hopefully folks were able to see that. And Jennifer also included a link to, as Katie mentioned, there is a companion PDF of this in case folks want to print it out and look through it that way. You'll see at the very beginning of this tool on the, before you go to the guiding questions, there's a link to the PDF, and Jennifer also included a link to that PDF on the ASPE website. And then we have a few questions that just came in. One is, are funds that are provided to public schools included in the available resource streams? So I wonder if some of the resources that speak to expanding access to ECE are relevant for that question.
Yes, the tool certainly does include resources that cover, for example, Title I funding and other similar resources that might be going to school districts. I think we don't have necessarily a separate section on those, but they are covered by the resources that we reviewed.
Great, thanks, Katie. And then there was another question. How will this tool be updated with new resources they become available, or will the resource lists be static? At the moment, there is not a current plan to keep updating this as we go. The project under which we develop this tool is ending, but we certainly, I know there's, we do, for example, you'll see that there's Katie's and my emails are included in the web-based tool just to get questions or comments. Certainly if there are new resources that become available, we're hoping we can hear about them that way. And hopefully if there's great interest in this tool, that there will be opportunities to, there may be opportunities to expand on it in the future. Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to chime in and say, Pia, is if it looks like this is a tool that folks are really finding useful, then I think that would help give us justification to keep it updated. So please, and that's where your feedback would be really useful. So let us know how it works for you, and if there is a desire, then I think that would definitely be a priority. Thanks.
And then there was another question about, does the tool provide information on the OMB circulars on accounting rules for use of federal funds? So I'll let Katie speak to this too, but I'll say that, well, Katie, maybe you should start and then I can jump in.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that unfortunately was not within the scope of this tool was to really dive deeply into the various allowable uses of specific federal funding streams. And so unfortunately, we're not able within the tool itself to provide information about what those allowable uses are and what the other kind of specific requirements or processes that might be aligned with a particular funding stream. What we do include in the tool is information about resources that might kind of contain that information, as well as general guidance about how to begin having conversations with, for example, program administrators at either the state or the federal level to learn more about what some of those specific requirements and allowable uses might be. Don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that, Pia.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. And I'll just acknowledge, certainly I mentioned earlier that part of our process here was talking to various stakeholders about, what resources do you use? What things would be useful? And many of you probably won't be surprised to hear that there are a range of funding stream specific resources that many mentioned would be useful. And we've certainly gathered those and have shared them with ASPE and other federal partners. But as Katie said, for this specific endeavor here, those more detailed sorts of resources were outside of the scope of this particular project. Let's see, here's a new question that came in. Can this tool be used by individual early childhood programs or only by state or local level? And is Early Head Start included in this? Katie, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, definitely. So starting with the second question first, since that one's pretty straightforward. Yes, we do cover Early Head Start in this tool, as well as other resources that are focused specifically on funding streams for infant and toddler care more generally. In terms of whether this tool can be used by individual early childhood programs, the primary target audience of this tool is users at the state and local level, and that is where I think most of the that is who the level of user who would find most these resources to be the most useful, since most of them are focused on aligning, for example, program requirements and building integrated data systems and developing plans for collaboration and coordination at the state or local government agency level. That said, there is, as I mentioned in the last section of the tool, we do include a series of resources that can support braiding at the provider level, including resources that are directly targeted for program administrators. And so that final section of the tool could be helpful and might be a place where a user who is a program administrator might want to go directly to this section of the tool.
Thanks, Katie. And I think we are up to time. So we're going to turn it back over to Stephanie. We'll keep an eye on the chat and answer any questions there too as we're able. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and there are a few more questions in the chat, and I know that we'll be responding there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, well, first I just want to thank you, Jennifer, Pia, and Katie. What a great presentation. The tool is wonderful, and I know people are going to be excited to start using it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lori now. Lori, we can't hear you.
Wow, that was a bummer. Good afternoon, everybody. That was a really fantastic presentation. I really like the way you have the circular process, so we can enter wherever we would like. Hold on 1 minute. I'm going to fix this echo.
Okay, you should be able to hear me now okay, perfect, great, thanks so much. So we wanted to share with you, I mean, finance and governance are really foundational to the systems change that the PDGB-5 is really working to support. So I'm going to be sharing the tools of the PDGB-5 TA Center that kind of wrap around and support the use of the blending and braiding toolkit, which I think is fantastic and will be an extremely useful resource to states and localities and those of us that are working with states and localities to support this systems change. So give me a minute, I'm going to share my screen. So now I'm on the PDGB-5 TA Center website, and under the kind of tiles on the web page, on the main page, there's a section on sustaining finances. For a minute, I'm going to give you an overview. A lot of what this webinar is about is finding the resources that you need when you need them. And so the sustaining finances resources that we've developed for the PDGB-5 are a toolkit, which I will show you in a minute, that actually talk about the strategic financing and all the issues related to costing out, finding funding, blending funding, and developing mechanisms to get the funding to providers and others in an accountable way to improve quality. We recently did a review of fiscal strategies that the PDGB-5 folks intended to implement. And that, again, is a great source of, if you're looking for a peer state that might be using contracting, for example, for childcare, or might be implementing a new tax policy, you can look in there and find out what are other states doing to address systemic and strategic financing. There's a webinar that we had not too long ago talking specifically about the federal funds, and then all the sessions that we had at our annual convening last year, which address financing. So there's tons of resources on there. Hopefully this allows you to get a quick snapshot and get to what you really want to see. Let's spend 1 second, I think, hold on 1 minute, on sharing with you. Nope, that's not going to work out. How much are we learning about technology here? Hold on a sec. Shoot, I thought I had it all set up. Give me a sec so that I can get to it. All right, well, I'll just do it this way. Really quickly, I will, is this showing full screen, Stephanie?
No.
So the finance tool, okay, the finance toolkit. The finance toolkit also is very, very helpful. And in our case, the definitions align, but we really reference the coordination of public funding streams. That's really what happens at the state level. Again, you'll see a number of different resources. And then we look at the program level, which is braiding and blending. Most likely all of our resources are in the toolkit as well. And so you would be able to access them. In addition to really thinking about fiscal mapping, as they mentioned, revenue generation and other resources like that. Very quickly on our website, if I get to it, I don't know why I'm not able to, let me see if this does it. Able to be full screen. Is that better, Stephanie, for seeing it? There are these resources, and then under governance, which again is really important, but I want to just point out to you one more resource that we worked on. Oh, here we go. That, sorry about that. here we go. So the governance resource, there's a very short but cool video that really talks about how governance influences state early childhood systems, but more specifically, kind of the functions of what states do. And so in this video, you'll find a couple clips from leaders in Maryland, North Carolina, and Georgia talking about how governance and financing kind of was intertwined and integral to the systems work they did. So that might be really helpful to you in situating your work in blending and braiding. We also have a toolkit that looks at various issues in governance and provides you with resources, as Pia and Katie mentioned, and they address the ability to blend and braid in part depends on both governance and the collaboration among multiple leaders and federal funding streams in terms of alignment, in terms of requirements around audits and other things. So the governance and finance, you kind of can't separate. There's other resources there. I'm going to conclude now, but what we'd really like to, in terms of our job, I suppose, as a TA center is to provide you with a lot of resources, but particularly for Stephanie and I and our TA center team who is working with states, our job is to help you both determine what's the pressing question and what are some of the ways you could address that. So I think that if these resources are helpful to you, but you'd also like some assistance in thinking them through how you could help solve your own specific problems to your state, then please be in contact with us. And I would echo what Jennifer Tschantz mentioned, is that a number of us, and I think the TA Center particularly, we really want to know what your needs are and how we could best meet them, either through tools or resources or technical assistance. And I think Richard is going to also talk about that in a couple minutes. But I thank you. If there's any questions for me, I'm happy to take them. But in general, we just wanted to make sure you know what you have access to in order to solve the problems that I know you're dealing with on a daily basis to ensure children and families get access to good quality services. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Richard Gonzalez. I'm the Federal Project Officer for Preschool Development Grants. I'm also the Director of the Division of Interagency and Special Initiatives in the Office of Child Care. And I wanted to just take a moment to show this slide for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you have not seen this slide or the presentation that came from the Office of Child Care on how to think about these various different funding streams, both the CARES Act as well as the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation and the American Rescue Plan, the presentation itself, which I'm going to put in the link in the chat in a moment, is well worth listening to because it really talks about the common requirements and allowable use of funds across these funding streams as you try to maintain the funding. Now, the reason I'm showing this, I think many of you probably heard the presentation. You're already working within your states with your partners on trying to figure out how to make the best use of these funds. But the reason I asked to put this slide up, first of all, I think it's a great summary slide. But the other reason is because periodically I get questions about, well, is there any extra funding for PDG birth to 5 in the ARPA, in the American Rescue Plan or in CARES, et cetera? And there wasn't any funding specific to PDG birth to 5. But I do want to remind folks, I think, again, many of you know this, but I do want to remind folks that the concise description of the various funding opportunities that are here are really here to hopefully support your state's birth to 5 strategic plan. So to the degree that you've developed a strategic plan that's considering about your entire early childhood settings, your mixed delivery settings, and the services for your child care families, we believe that the funding here is directed toward that. So when someone asks me, well, what does this have to do with PDG birth to 5? I point out again that the purpose of PDG birth to 5 is that states would more effectively be able to collaborate and coordinate so that you are more efficiently planning and using all federal, state, local, and non-governmental funding. So while there's not specific PDG additional dollars that came as a result of these acts, there is the expectation that what you are doing feeds right into the purpose of PDG, which is really making sure that you're working collaboratively with all of your partners within the state to look at the strategic plan, to revise your strategic plans as needed, and then to implement those plans by thinking about the funding that's available. Let me just quickly add into the chat the link that I just mentioned to everyone, and then everyone in meeting. There you go. And what I wanted to do is just again speak to the fact that if you are not aware of the different uses of this funding, how the stabilization funding is different from the supplemental discretionary funds. For example, the fact that those supplemental discretionary funds, you have an additional obligation deadline to be able to use those dollars. The fact that those supplemental discretionary funds are focused on addressing your entire child care market far beyond the subsidy system, and that all the CARES and SURSA and stabilization grant funds are really about ways to look at how you maintain and support the service providers that are in your state. Again, I think you know that, but I wanted to take a moment to refer you to the resource, to the links for those webinars, and to remind you of the purpose of PDG as it relates to all of the work that you're doing in your state. I think there might be another slide here. Carla, could you just check? Yeah, so I want, to this point, expanding access to child care assistance. So much of the work that you're doing with PDG Birth to 5 in the States and that you're doing even if you don't have a renewal grant has to do with how you improve and support your data systems. And you're looking at equitable access. You've heard, you know, in your own states as well as the federal government now, that we're really focusing more on equity and the ability to look at equitable issues as we look at all parts of our funding. So here you see that these funds are about modernizing and maintaining the data systems, so allowable use of funds, and that there's consider upgrades and improvements that would allow you to inform your parents more effectively so that the knowledge they have allows them to make better choices, for data upgrades and analysis to inform your policies, similar to the resources that were just shared with you now, but basically determining if the resources you have are sufficient, and if not, helping identify those resources that would be beneficial to you so that you can be focusing on more equitably distributing those resources and funds to families and providers. And then strongly encourage to upgrade the engaging families in real time and providers in real time, which is what we're trying to do. So to the degree that you can do that, it is certainly one of the things that are being recommended and supported through all of those funding streams and through all of the policies and strategies that we recommend. So thank you very much. I know we're out of time. I need to pass quickly to Stephanie so she can wrap up, and we really appreciate you spending time in this session with us.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Lori and Janet and Pia and Katie. We really appreciate it. I just want you all to know we are sending out an evaluation. We would love to hear your feedback. It makes us get better at what we do and provide you more information. And again, just thank you very much for your time today. And we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.